well, folk is of the people, and it's kind of whatever the people are making. And its traditions are not just the objects, it's like an ethos, this way of making, basically creating things with what you have to hand, the materials you have to hand, and it's not for profit, it's not for, they can be, but it's not at its core, it's not a money making scheme, right? It's like I feel compelled to tell stories or share stories. I, I'm going to do that with the things I have to hand. And whether that's singing or whether that's like coding a cool website, building a mini game, um, because you've learned how to do that on YouTube, that to me is folk. And I think we've always just used the technologies we have to hand. Um, and we have, it's easier to play a free software synth than it is to acquire and then learn a hurdy-gurdy, like it's what is the more folk instrument now? Is it a software synth? To me, it would be. I mean, I love a hurdy-gurdy, obviously, but
Hi, you're listening to Conversations with Musicians with Leah Roseman, which I hope inspires you through the personal stories of a fascinating diversity of musical guests. Jayne Dent is a wonderful British interdisciplinary artist, singer, and composer, and I was absolutely delighted to explore ideas around a creative and playful life with her. You'll be hearing clips of music from Me Lost Me, with inspirations from folk culture old and new. She opened my mind to what folk creativity and community can mean in the 21st century. You'll also hear about community music making, collaborations with dancers, experimentation with E-textiles, and the challenges and joys of her career path. I was really struck by her creative and curious spirit, and you'll be hearing about some of her chance-based writing tips and her varied interests from creating costumes to medieval sword fighting. You can watch the video on my YouTube or listen to the podcast, and I've also linked the transcript. It's a joy to bring these inspiring episodes to you, and I do all the many jobs of research, production, and publicity. Have a look at the show notes of this episode on my website, where you'll find all the links, including different ways to support this podcast and other episodes you'll enjoy. Hey Jayne, so great to meet you.
nice to meet you too.
So you're presently in London for a gig as we record this, but you're based in Newcastle upon Tyne. Like it's different than, there's different Newcastles, right?
There's an Underlime, which is a bit further south and to the like west of Newcastle upon Tyne. But yes, that's the one I'm at.
And yeah, and there's one in Canada and
Of
there's one
course.
in Northern Ireland. Yeah, I was just curious to
Yeah.
see where you were based. Yeah.
Mhm.
And you had moved there originally for visual art many years ago.
Yeah, I moved there in 2013, I think, to study fine art. Which was I was interested in a mix of things and ended up doing a lot of sound art and performance art, which kind of gradually became more music. And well, it still flits between the two, but yeah, so it was always a little blurry, I think.
I was so interested to discover your work, and I was super interested with all the intersection of your creative practice. So I'm hoping we'll get into a couple of Me Lost Me's projects and some of your community collaborations. I thought a good place to start, especially for those people that don't know you or your fans, would be actually your 2023 album, RPG.
Mhm.
For people who haven't heard it, maybe you could say in your own words kind of what the project's about.
Um, I always joke when I do it live that I set out to write an album about video games, and it is kind of, but it's also mainly about the weather. So many of the songs are about the weather because they're about, I guess, place and environments, and whether that be a real air quote environment or one that's been created in a virtual world. It's about exploring these places and kind of exploring yourself through exploring these sorts of places. And it kind of, I come from like a folk music kind of family, and I'm really interested in like technology, and those two things, kind of fused throughout the Me Lost Me like music. But yeah, this album was leaning more into, I guess I played a lot of video games during lockdown and ended up writing songs about them directly or indirectly. So that was this album was kind of the linchpin of that, kind of holding it all together. Yeah.
I listened quite a bit to This Material Moment, your more recent album, which we're going to get into later in the episode, and also RPG. And it's, not knowing what to expect, we hear the beautiful close harmony a cappella and then the electronics coming in and then clarinet. And it's such an interesting mixture of textures, and I don't know, it's very immersive music. I thought, though, it would be cool to start with a clip of, you have this old song, I assume it's Middle English, Miri it is while summer I last.
Uh-huh.
Miri it is with summer I last, with fugelets song. Ach nu the wind is blast and weather is strong. What is nicht is long, and ich with well mich wrong. Sorgen murren and fast. Mir it is with a summer last.
So is that Middle English?
Oh, I think so. I always get them confused when the borders of, I think it's Middle English or Old English. Not a historian, just a fan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of history. Yeah, so it's one of the oldest songs, kind of recorded songs that is secular, written in an English language. There's a couple, also summaries are coming in, appropriate because today is the 1st of May, as well as sort of around the same sort of time. And this song was found, a fragment of this song was found, it was only recorded because a monk took interest in it, wrote down the notation of this verse in a Bible, and it was found years later. So this is kind of a rare little snippet. There might have been more to the song than this one verse, but yeah, I took the melody and added a bunch of set it for eight or nine voices, and had to play around with this one verse that got saved of this song.
Yeah. I was curious about the close harmony. So since most folk music wasn't notated, certainly not harmony, is that just the oral tradition that we know about that?
Yeah, I mean, the harmonies very much, they came about organically. So a lot of how I write songs or arrange songs of other people, I guess, is through improvisation. I'm not really like a notation gal. I sing the song. I mean, I can read music, but I like to learn, by hearing songs. So I also write by singing. So I recorded the main melody and just kind of in Ableton layered up a bunch of different harmonies, kind of very improvised, very like, and there's maybe a few notes I was like, well, I'll take that one out in as I arranged it, and then kind of notated and gave it to the singers who performed it on the album. So it was very much like an improvised harmony, rather than a sensible, historically accurate one.
Yeah, that's interesting, Jayne. But actually, my question was more to, like, I guess you don't know the answer to this, but how do we know how people sang in folk settings in terms of the harmony? Is it influenced from the church? You know what I mean? In terms of.
Yeah, I mean, I think the exciting thing for me is that we don't. I love not knowing things.
Yeah.
And I think it's so beautiful that we can get this one snippet of melody. And realistically, there's probably 1,000 different iterations of the song. No one was, if people weren't notating it, people weren't, learning it as such. They were also probably improvising the melodies around harmonics that they understood and knew. So I guess I was kind of doing the same, really. They weren't consciously fitting a style or a harmonic structure. They were just like, this sounds right to me now, and which I think is pretty cool.
And on RPG, so the use of electronics, you definitely have some really whimsical video game sounds coming through. Are those imitations from games you were playing or samples, or you just went your own way on that?
Um, it's a mix, so nothing's directly sampled from a video game, although on this is very nerdy. On so there's a song that's specifically about Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and Ableton has a function where you can take an audio sample and it will imitate the reverb, the like echo
Okay.
that is on that, or it takes the shape of the waveform. And there's this common recurring sound of a drip that's very, very like got this huge reverb on it, and I sort of copied that reverb a little and like transplanted it into that song, which is such a tiny, silly, nerdy detail. But everything else is, yeah, it's built to their sounds inspired by the worlds, but they're not taken directly from them, but they're supposed to echo that kind of space, I guess. Yeah.
I witnessed a fight in a mirror stairwell.
And you had a residency in Aarhus in Denmark?
Oh, I did a couple of residencies there because I studied there on my exchange. So there was a couple, I did a couple of little trips back to make work there, which was nice.
Yeah, and we'll get into your academic life because you're doing your doctorate now. So that those residencies were part of your master's or earlier?
They were in between, so they were after I studied at the Art Academy in Aarhus on my undergraduate, and then went back after I'd graduated to yeah, do these residencies to make work.
Okay. So do you know some Danish?
Not a lot, not a great deal. It used to be better.
Yeah. So the oldest trees hold the earth. So beautiful. I understand the way you co-wrote it with your friend. Is it Ditte Elly? How does she say her name?
Dita?
Ditte. Okay. So you were in the woods in Denmark and you had this creative process to write this song together?
Yeah, it was so me and Dita met actually in the UK, and by some strange coincidence she also ended up in Aarhus. And so we met, and I stayed with her for a few days. We've sung together for years, and we decided to try and write something together. And so we sat in this woods, which is this amazing place where it's woodland, and then it suddenly drops off in a cliff, and then it's beach, and then it's a bay. It's a really amazing like instant change of kind of biome. It's really beautiful. And we sat there and passed a piece of paper between each other, and we just like sat in silence. I wrote a line, she wrote a line, I wrote a line, and then we took it back to her house and we sang it. We just improvised around it, and yeah, it was a really lovely way to write a song. And you never, you think you know where a lyric's going, and then you get the piece of paper back and you're like, oh, that's not where I was going with that at all. So then you have to like pivot. It's really creative, inspiring. It's nice.
The sea through the trees, seen and heard and smelled, salt air and sticks snap underfoot. Johanneter vender på regn. The oldest trees hold the earth, clumps against the soil like hands.
Yeah. Actually, it might be interesting to talk about your work in the community. Like you do music workshops. I'm sure you do different things with that.
Yeah, I do lots of sort of I like to think I get brought in sometimes as a kind of disruption to often it'll be community groups that regularly meet and do songwriting in a very like chorus, verse, bridge, chords, rhyming structures type way, and then I get brought in to like cause a bit of chaos and to be like, what if you only need one chord throughout the whole song? Do you need a bridge? Like, have you tried playing with this? So I quite like kind of like gently introducing a bit of like chaos to what people understand as music and play around with it, try and introduce like improvisation or um electronics. And yeah, I kind of always want it to be very accessible, and I think sometimes the kind of traditional way of like understanding songwriting can be difficult if you've not kind of, had proper music training, air quotes. So I like this kind of idea that anyone can write a song, anyone can be creative, everyone's voices are important and interesting, and they have stories to tell. And like finding ways of supporting people to tell their stories is really important. And it doesn't need to have a bridge and a chorus, and it can be however you want it to be. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. That's great. And what kind of improv exercises do you do with people in community settings?
Ooh, I guess there's a lot of kind of fun games that involve the voice, that kind of, because I'm a singer and a lot of people say they can't sing because they got told once when they were 6 years old that they couldn't sing, so they don't use their voice, which I think is a shame. And so I try and do a lot of games where you kind of almost like tricked into singing or using your voice in an unconventional way. I think that's a really fun and exciting thing to do. It like relaxes people, and um, doing a lot of I think a lot of the exercises I like doing are things where, because having a blank page is scary, so you make a word cloud of different words that you can bounce off, or creating all these structures for yourself, so you don't need to stare at a blank piece of paper or sing into an empty room. You've got things to hold on to. Try and provide like a framework in the improv. I think that's important. Don't just say improvise, because that's terrifying. I would hate it if someone did that to me. So
In terms of, you describe your music as future folk, and I understand like this DIY aesthetic. So you're redefining what folk means. Do you want to talk to that a little bit?
well, focus of the people, and it's kind of whatever the people are making, and its traditions are not just the objects. It's like an ethos, this way of making, and it's kind of basically creating things with what you have to hand, the materials you have to hand, and it's not for profit, it's not for, they can be, but it's not at its core, it's not a money making scheme, right? It's like I feel compelled to tell stories or share stories. I, I'm gonna do that with the things I have to hand. And whether that's singing or whether that's like coding a cool website, building a mini game, because you've learned how to do that on YouTube, that to me is folk. And I think we've always just used the technologies we have to hand. Um, and we have, it's easier to play a free software synth than it is to acquire and then learn a hurdy-gurdy, like it's what is the more folk instrument now? Is it a software synth? To me, it would be. I mean, I love a hurdy-gurdy, obviously, but yeah, so I think it's important to, yeah, talk about accessibility within folk. I think it's intrinsically, yeah, it's at what the core of folk is.
Yeah. So with Me Lost Me, you've been touring for almost 10 years.
Oof, I have. Gosh. Yep.
So you sometimes do it solo, but you have collaborators you work with as
Mhm.
well.
Yes, yeah. So quite often I play with John Pope and Faye McCalman, who are absolutely incredible musicians that come from a more jazz background. Um, and also more recently, I've been playing with Ewan on drums, which is really nice. It's very nice to have live drums. It kind of in that, and it's quite nice. We all have quite different musical backgrounds because it brings such a nice, yeah, flavor to it. And yeah, I love playing live with them. It's a very different experience. I spend most of my sets giggling when they're when they're with me. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so you're doing your PhD now
Hmm.
so you're based at the Open Lab in Newcastle University School of Computing.
It's true.
So uh, what is your doctorate about? Are you free to speak about that, or is it still in progress?
It's very much in progress. That's like the
Yeah.
scariest question to ask someone doing a PhD. No,
We don't have to go.
oh
We
no,
don't
no,
have
I'm
to.
happy to talk about it.
Okay.
Whether it'll be the same answer next week or the week after, who knows? Yeah, I'm a couple of years, I'm just about 2 years in now. Um, so my work is kind of uh, looking at how technology can be better designed to support people's well-being as a very general kind of broad description. So I'm kind of looking at folk culture, craft culture, particularly actually non-league football, um, kind of that like uh, collaborative song, making banners, those sorts of practices as an example for how technology could potentially be created in a more in a way that is less centered on kind of making a profit and also replacing people. There's the whole AI thing, right? Like it's very like an antidote to AI, this kind of handmade technology. Can we use technology in a way that is better for us, basically? Um, so it does feel sometimes like I might be shouting into a bit of a void on the technology side because I'm sort of like, but what about people? And maybe we don't need to be making things fast and efficient. Maybe we could be making cool, beautiful, meaningful things with this technology as like you know, uh, a way of making art, and yeah, that kind of thing. So it's very fun, and difficult working on it.
I do feel like there's a pushback now that people are more interested in things that
Mm.
are made by hand, created by, individuals or communities across arts and crafts and all the things.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think specifically, I'm not saying we get rid of technology. I think that's a lot of people who are sort of saying, or I've seen people say, like ditch the technology back to like old ways of doing things. And I'm not necessarily in that camp. We have all this cool tech. We could incorporate it, or what mad things could we, what beautiful light up sound responsive like costumes could we make, or like what are the how could technology actually integrate and benefit us instead of sort of saying nah, let's go back to uh you know analog everything. Yeah, because I love technology. It's great, like I said, building a little web game or like I think that's so exciting as a art form.
So let's get into your work in e-textiles,
Yeah.
because you've done exhibits in galleries and also your recent album. So how did you get involved with that?
Ooh, how did I? I guess so on my master's I did a bit of creative computing, um and started to try and build. I actually had a dulcimer, an Appalachian dulcimer from my dad that had broken because my dad, everyone gives him instruments. They're like they have an instrument, they're like, we'll give it Jack, he's got loads, and he started passing them on to me, and this was a bit broken, this dulcimer, and I thought it would be really fun to try and rig it up to be a kind of MIDI controller. So I yeah, looked into e-textiles ways of making strings or making this like elastic that was responsive, and built a little bit of code that sort of made this horrible synth sound. Awful. It's like really whiny sine sound. But that was kind of the first attempt in e-textiles, and I've loved textile work for a long time, and I make clothes and costumes and banners and things. And so it was a very natural, like, I guess, marrying of interests, this like sound thing that I had, and then this textile thing. Yeah, and so I've now made quite a few sort of installations and instruments that are kind of soft objects. And they're also quite good as accessible instruments because they don't look like instruments. So no one has the fear that you get when presented with a keyboard. Oh, I can't play piano. You have a bunch of shapes on a banner and you're like, great, I'm going to play them. And then you get people improvising in a gallery space and it's playful and lovely and they're not, hit with the I'm bad at music fear. Yeah, so it's a really fun way of getting people to play, I guess.
Yeah, and of course your website will be linked so people can see your current installations. I was just taking notes as you were talking. Clothes, costumes, banners. What? Let's get into that.
Yeah, I just love sewing. I just have a lot of hobbies. Like collect all the hobbies. What else can I learn how to do? I just love learning. Yeah, so particularly for this most recent album and for the music videos and for live shows, um, I've been doing a lot more kind of designing and making of costumes and clothes for that. Um, I got into just sort of making clothes a few years ago and then realized that I could, yeah, design this whole bunch of costumes that linked everything together like aesthetically and kind of add to this like world of the album. Because I've been making banners for a while for myself, well, for myself and art stuff, but also commissioned by people, by bands and organizations to make banners. Um, so it seemed like a natural, like, yeah, again, little way of building a world, I guess.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You mentioned your family and your dad's instrument collection. So what was that like growing up in your house singing?
Chaos. Yeah, my parents so my mum was a Morris dancer, and my dad used to play concertina for the Morris dancing team my mum danced in. So I was constantly, I mean, I'm an only child, but I was just constantly with a thousand, not related aunties and uncles and cousins. It felt like this big kind of folky family. We'd go to days of dance and go to pubs to sing folk sessions. Like as a child, I'd just be at a pub, surrounded by this folk music. It wasn't a job. They had normal jobs, but it was just kind of their hobby and their passion. And it's really, I feel very privileged to have grown up around parents who were so invested in their hobbies. I think it's a really beautiful thing to see, as a child, to see adults very passionate about making stuff and being creative and having lots of friends and that sort of thing. So I feel lucky, and I feel like as a teenager I was like, this is rubbish, I don't like it, I'm goth now. But obviously that didn't last long and then I got back into it very quickly. Yeah,
So did you learn to do the Morris dancing as a child?
did do a bit of Morris dancing. Yep, I've dabbled in Morris dancing. Yes.
I've never seen it. What's it like?
Oh, well, there's lots of different kinds. My mum was in a Northwest Garland clog dance group. So they had these big, heavy clog shoes with bells on. So it was a lot of kind of slow stepping and walking, and they had big garlands, and they'd kind of be in a group of six, and they'd sort of walk in amongst each other, and yeah, it was quite kind of slow and calm. There's some that are a lot more like crazy and shouting and jumping and doing some flips sometimes. And um, but yeah, theirs was this really, I guess, like quite steady, uh, yeah, quite a steady dance. Um, and yeah, I joined in with that and tried a few other little versions of Morris dancing as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, I've listened to bits of folk music like a lot of people, sort of more popular acts growing up, but I'm not in the folk community in Canada. So I'm sure many people here could answer this question, but my impression as a Canadian is when we think about the British Isles and folk music that was brought here, it's Ireland and Scotland, and we don't talk about the rest of the UK and Wales. And there's obviously this rich folk tradition of music and dance that I'm sure got brought over to North America, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure.
You know what? Seems like this Celtic connection because of a lot of the immigrants.
Yeah, I mean, it's so regional. It's village to village sometimes. So it's those things, I guess, can get lost because often there's only like 30 people doing them sometimes, you know. So I'm originally from Derbyshire, and there's a tradition there called well dressing about this time of year where they put flowers, they decorate the village well, with flowers, floral scenes, really elaborate floral scenes, quite often biblical scenes. Sometimes last year I saw one that was like Toy Story themed. They also do popular culture ones too. And then Morris dancers like dance at them, and they are blessed by the local church. And this is a very Derbyshire specific tradition. Every village will have one, but then once you get beyond the boundaries of the county, it's not a thing. So they can be so localized that I think sometimes it can get lost in the way it disperses, I guess.
Well, let's get into, we were talking about E-textiles, so let's talk about this material moment. So I was interested in these automatic writing techniques that you did a workshop with Julia Holter.
Yeah.
Hi, just a really quick break from the episode. I wanted to let you know about some other episodes that I've linked directly to this one in the show notes for you, with Lena Jonsson Jean Rohe, Lawrence English, Eliza Marshall, and Maya Youssef. In the show notes, you'll also find a link to sign up for my newsletter, where you'll get exclusive information about upcoming guests. A link for my Ko-fi page to support this project directly, where you can buy me one coffee or every month, and my podcast merchandise store with the design commissioned from artist Steffi Kelly. You can also review this podcast, share it with your friends, and follow on your podcast app, YouTube, and social media. All this helps spread the word. Thanks. Now, back to my conversation with Jayne.
Yeah, that was a really inspiring trip. So Camp France is an incredible place. It's in the Pyrenees Mountains in the south of France, which is very nice. And they run residencies that are kind of guided by artists. And I went and did 2 weeks back to back, one with Julia Holter about nonsense and non-words and kind of writing, different approaches to writing, and one with Tashi Wada, which was about alternate tunings as well. And both of them were quite influential on this album. And yeah, so some of the techniques were things that we learnt with Julia at that on that residency, and that I then took and played around with in a new way as well. I sort of, because she'd kind of said, oh, this is a John Cage one, or this is, she was taking them from the learning of somebody, and then I was kind of taking them and also running with them in different directions as well to try and see what else could come of them, which was fun.
And these artist residencies, I mean, there must be this cool cross-pollination in the community. Have you found that?
Yeah, definitely. And you also meet lots of amazing people from all over the world, which is really lovely. Like I've got friends, all over the place, from kind of going and meeting this place in France, which is amazing. Like I know that if I wanted to go to San Diego, I'd probably have someone who could put me up, like it feels, it's really nice to have this community that we kind of still keep a little in touch. I keep an eye on what people are making. It's this lovely kind of community built with people from all over the world, which is nice that you just suddenly get dumped in a place for a week and like live together and eat together and go for walks and make music. It's nice. Yeah.
So I had to look up mesostic.
Yeah.
That's a right.
Uh-huh.
Look down, your roots are rooted
So you talked a little bit about that, like using chance
Mm,
based writing strategies, right?
hmm
So in your show notes for the album, it said that it became unexpectedly personal,
mm.
feelings of burnout and overwhelm. And I'm wondering, like, you have been in school a long time. Is that part of it, the academic overwhelm, or just being a touring musician?
I would say, yeah, I'd say it's more the latter. I think it's so hard to be a freelance for anything, but a freelance artist and musician, and that balance of never knowing, yeah, never knowing where the money's coming from always, or like, oh, this it's very precarious, and I think that was doing a lot more damage to me than I realized. Even though I loved so much of it, it's that, I'm working on all these amazing projects, but you're like, in 2 months, I have nothing planned. What if I don't have anything planned? It's this real, yeah. So I think it's probably the precarity of that, and then, um, yeah, that being quite difficult. And also I think that's why one of the reasons I was drawn to these chance-based strategies is because they get someone else can do the decision, right? Or something else. The initial decision is made for you. It's this nice improvisory technique where you're not in charge for once. You're like, I'm putting this is out of my hands, and then I'm gonna respond to these words that something else has given me, a process has given me these words, it's not up to me this time. This is out of my hands. And then it ends up being all about you. It ends up being so you read it back and like, oof, where did that come from? Um, but I think having that initial spark not being in your hands is a very freeing uh thing, I think, especially when you're constantly just like trying to get work, trying to make stuff, trying to like beg for money. You're like, please hire me or whatever. So yeah, I think it was therapeutic in a lot of ways, actually, writing like that.
Yeah. So maybe we could get into some of the tracks. Even like the last track, Have You Been Changing?
Hmm Yeah, that was a mesostic poem. So that was one that I wrote the lyrics to in France, but I hadn't got a melody for. But I'd written a poem using one of these strategies, and it's one of two on the album that are written using a book that was like a manual for making like hand tools. So it's like how to make like a hand clamp, or like how to make something for your workshop. So it was very practical, um practical doing instruction words basically. So this poem kind of sounded kind of, yeah, it's very materials based. It's got a lot about like color and texture, sharp edges, like all these different kind of physical properties that it's sort of describing in this book, and then kind of turning that into a an emotional, or like a metaphorical kind of thing through this process of turning it into a poem, and then improvising in response to that poem, and seeing this kind of thing emerge that felt very, I don't know, have I been changing? I have, I haven't, like this conversation with myself kind of emerged from it, I guess.
This is just a fraction of its length. Have you been changing? Have you been changing? Have you been changing?
And touring this album, which came out last year, was that some of the bigger touring you've done since the pandemic lockdowns, or was it RPG before that?
Oh, I mean, both, I guess. I've done a sort of a bigger tour kind of once a year, for the last few years, as well as a couple of little shorter ones and particularly like tour supports for people, which are always fun because you get taken around in a van. Um, but yeah, it's definitely one of the longest. The last two tours were the last sort of like after the albums were the longest kind of biggest ones I've done in a while, yeah. Or ever actually, really. To be kind of a couple of weeks away, yeah.
And just in the UK or in Europe?
Just in the UK, I played a festival in Denmark, which was really lovely. Not last summer, the summer before. But no, it's become a bit harder to tour in Europe since Brexit, unfortunately. It's definitely doable. Working on it, but there's a lot more hoops now to jump through. So hopefully we'll get a proper European tour in soon. Mm.
I know it's a big problem for Canadians because our country's so incredibly big,
Mm.
and it's like you can't, yeah, even regional tours are difficult. And it was always difficult for us to go to the States, but now, of course, it's much harder. And so, yeah, but I imagine in the UK it's so much more densely populated.
Yeah, you can do yeah, you can do a pretty decent tour and everyone kind of knows each other eventually. Like it's very the DIY sort of touring scene in the UK is so tight knit, which is lovely. And quite often, even if you don't know someone in a city, your friend will. You can be like, "Oh, do you know anyone in Cardiff you can put me on?" And then they usually do, or at least someone you can ask. So it's very kind of once you're in this sort of network, I think it is, I mean, it's difficult because a lot of people are sort of venues are closing, like venues and promoters are struggling. It's not, I wouldn't say it's easy to tour in the UK, but it's a very lovely, passionate community who try their best, and I think that's, very valuable. Yeah.
If you were gifted a certain large sum of money that had to be used to create a new venue for performing arts, what would it look like?
Ooh, oh, that's so nice. I love that. Oh, I think it would be really cool to find a beautiful neglected building and bring it back so it's got a bit of history in it. I've played a couple of gigs that I always joke that I'd love to do a tour where it's only buildings that have an info board, like a history info board in, because there's been a couple of venues where I've played in museums or I've played in historical sites. I think that's very fun. So I would maybe find somewhere that's got a bit of history and then kind of, yeah, turn it into a lovely immersive audiovisual accessible space. That would be very nice. That would be lovely. And it'd be in the north specifically, because I love the north.
And you're playing with your Frey McCalman on clarinet, and I
Mhm.
thought track 4, Painting of the Wind, features her quite
Mhm.
beautifully.
For my sins, the billowing wind, caught in sails, in skirts hem, lifting, breathing life into the fabric of us. Oh.
Yeah, it seems to make sense with it being a song about wind to have a wind instrument. It's very, very literal. I was like, you know what? I feel like this needs the air and it needs the quality of the clarinet in particular. And I also wanted it to feel quite like romantic. Like it's supposed to be this like painterly, slightly like this like pretty sweet thing. So I kind of yeah thought that yeah that's kind of how I wanted it to be yeah in the arrangement and have this lovely um yeah I love the clarinet. It's such a beautiful instrument, so I just want to drench everything in it to be honest. And Faye's so great. She's an amazing player. So yeah.
And John Pope on bass, and
Hmm.
he plays both electric and acoustic on this. If I'm
He does, yeah. He's before this album, it was just double bass. And then I kept joking that this album or a couple of songs on the album were my like rock opera uh songs that were very like dramatic when we were recording them. And I was like, I feel like this just needs a bit of like electric bass actually, and the drums. I wanted it to be a bit more like a bit more dramatic, a bit more yeah, have a bit of a different feel, which was yeah, which was really nice. And I've been writing, I write bits of parts for them, but I there are some songs where I'm just like, do your thing, I trust you. And particularly for the electric bass, I'd never written for it before, and I was like, just just jam. And he did great things, which yeah.
and you know I notated some. I made little notes on some of the tracks, but if you want to talk about, I'm happy to include little clips and encourage people to check out the whole album. Are there a
Hmm.
couple more tracks from this material moment that you want to talk about?
Ooh,
Like Ancient Summer.
yeah, can do yeah, that feels appropriate. Yeah, Ancient Summer was actually the first song I wrote for the album. And it's the first time I used this technique, this mesostic poem technique. And so this song was written in its entirety in France after I'd been to visit a Roman aqueduct. Um, and the song is so the lyrics are taken from the tourist pamphlet for this Roman aqueduct, and which is why the vocabulary in it is it's so hyperbolic, which I love. It's like marvel, like wonderful, beautiful. Like it's so it's using all these words that are trying to persuade you to go to a place. It's very like wow. But that's genuinely how I felt when I was there. Like it's an amazing place, and I felt really like I got to swim in the river that's under this aqueduct, and it was a really beautiful moment for me. And then this song kind of came out of I took this tourist pamphlet for the following week to Camp France and made this song, this like hyperbolic love letter to like people and history, like our history and the things we make that last, and the joy you can find in those things, these like marvels. Yeah.
Inventive lovers at dusk. And what more universal flavor than love left and reconstructed? Oh, beautiful like me. Oh,
Beautiful. Did you get more into synths and looping and stuff during the pandemic, like a lot of people?
Oh, I'm not sure I did. I got what I did get more into during the pandemic was uh online, like building websites and building things that you could access online. So I was doing my master's when lockdown happened, and we were supposed to have a show, an exhibition of our work at the end of it, which obviously did not happen. But in some ways, that was great for my learning because then we were like, right, we need to build an online audiovisual installation. How do we do that? So I had to learn how to kind of, code websites in a way that would reflect what I creatively wanted to do. So I made this website that had a variety of different sounds and a variety of different images, and every time you refreshed it, it would be a different collage of those things. So it was like randomized, kind of audiovisual, like time-based thing. And so by necessity, I had to kind of do a lot of the yeah, I was much more interested, and I am generally interested in like being in a place and being immersed and experiencing something in an embodied way. Um, but it was really interesting to have to then move that online and what that means. Like, how do you immerse someone? How do you give someone that experience in a web browser? That's very hard. So it was kind of a fun, I guess, challenge to figure out how to translate that liveness, the electronics that I think fill a room in a beautiful way. How do I actually make that make people feel things on the internet, I guess. Yeah.
Now, I was thinking about your, like, now there's a dance collaboration. I don't know if it's current, Abundance.
hmm
And so when you're performing, you're improvising with electronics in that setting.
hmm
So the
Yeah.
description says it's an intergenerational dance performance that it invites audiences to slow down, rest, and reconnect. And then it says there's 3 professional dancers and 3 volunteer dancers. But from what I understand, the 3 volunteer dancers are chosen before. It's not like they get up from the audience and suddenly
Yeah, yeah,
are
yeah,
put
yeah.
into it.
Yeah, they're involved in the kind of making of the piece as well. So we had it in 3 different places. There's one more performance of it in the summer, but the initial stage is we had 3 groups of volunteer performers who attend dance classes in the kind of locations which were around the northeast of England. Um, and we kind of collaboratively, I was doing the music at the same time. They were kind of coming together to make this work like all at once. So the volunteers were in the room. We were talking about different improvisatory techniques and ideas of abundance, like what does abundance to you, um, and developed this sort of semi-improvised work kind of around it. So they were very much involved in the making of the piece. It was shaped um, like it was sort of shaped sometimes in the room without them, but they came with these ideas and yeah, so they have this like ownership of the piece. It's a really beautiful um yeah work that I'm really proud of being a part of. Everyone that worked on it's really yeah created a beautiful environment for like working. So it's very, very nice.
So it's intergenerational. I'm
Mhm.
assuming there's some older dancers who are usually excluded
Yes.
from
So
professional dance.
yeah, so I think the youngest dancer was 23 and the oldest dancer was 82. Think I'm right.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah. So it was very much this like spread um and this celebration of different bodies, different women's bodies at different kind of times, and a lot of it focused on play and watching adults be playful. Which I feel like is a a theme generally actually. But yeah, this idea lots of the feedback was like it's so nice to see, older women being like really expressive in their bodies and like, joyful and childlike and like other emotions too, but this kind of, yeah, we really wanted to present this range of bodies and range of ages and range of um yeah, feelings. It's a very emotional work. It's really nice.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Have you talked to anyone who does like somatic therapy, like therapy with dance and movement to help with emotions?
No, I haven't really. I'm aware of its existence, but I don't know much about it. No.
So, in terms of your more experimental music, because we were talking a lot about songs before earlier, so Worm Saliva is your sort of project. So, experimental improvised music. And I was listening on Bandcamp, and there's a track, Brass Neck Melt. I
Mm.
thought we could just include a little bit of that to get people to hear a little bit of that
hmm
type of music making.
hmm I wanted something. I think it came from, so as I was doing more and more Me Lost Me gigs, there was, I guess, this expectation that I would play the songs. And I wanted to, and that felt like a place I wanted to, like, know what the shape of the gig. I wanted to know what songs I was playing, create this specific narrative, maybe through the songs. And then I kind of missed something that was in the earlier Me Lost Me stuff, which had a bit more improvisation, and wanted a kind of outlet for that, for experiments. So the Worm Saliva stuff is very much like I get offered a gig, I say yes, and then I make something and it disappears into the ether. And it might turn into something else. Like I think it's a quite an important part of my creative process now, even for songwriting for Me Lost Me or whatever. Like it feeds into other things, but there's something very nice about it just existing in that instant. And so the things that are on Bandcamp, I can't perform again, and I won't perform again. That's not kind of their function. They're like documents of these instances of improvisation and experimentation. Um, yeah, it's nice to have. I like having these big project, medium project, little project. This lasts 40 minutes, and then it's done. Kind of. I think it's nice to have multiple levels of yeah, creative process length because you can get bogged down. The album release cycle and all these big things that are more out of your control, whereas Worm Saliva is just me playing around, um, throwaway in a nice way.
One of the tracks has somebody giving a lecture, I think, about worms. Is that where it came from?
The name, the name
Yeah.
actually, the name is very silly. The name came, so I said yes to a gig, to an improv gig, and I was like, well, I don't want to be Jayne, and it's not Me Lost Me. That's not what this is. I want it to be something else. And I asked on Instagram for suggestions
Oh.
for what it could be called. I was completely like, I don't know. And my friend Debbie, who performs, is a part of Bird Ellen, whose work's amazing. Uh, she suggested Worm Saliva, and I got a few other suggestions, and then I took it out of my hands entirely, put a poll up, what should I play as? And Worm Saliva won. So I
Okay.
had absolutely nothing to do with the name of Worm Saliva, but then I actually ended up finding it quite inspiring, and then like it's like, right, well, got really interested in like silkworms and like what is worms, like like conceptually I kind of took it and ran with it a bit. So um yeah, which was very playful and fun, yeah.
And how about the name Me Lost Me? How did that come about?
So that was, again, this is very silly and throwaway actually. But when I was living in Denmark, my friends were making fun of me. So from Derbyshire originally, my accent's gone all over the place now, but I say me instead of my, so me this. So and I also lose things a lot. I'm very bad at losing things. And I would always be like, oh, I've lost my keys, I've lost my phone, uh, whatever. And my friends were like, me lost me keys, me lost me, like me lost this. I'm always losing things. And it was this very silly sort of almost like nickname type thing. And because me lost me really started kind of how Worm Saliva started, which was like, I'm gonna put something out. Don't know, don't know, I'll just put a thing on Bandcamp, I'll make a little improvised thing. It might not become anything. So it started as this quite, yeah, I'll use that, this throwaway thing. And it's quite funny because some people like have come to me and be like, so deep, is it about being lost in yourself? And I feel a bit bad admitting that it's actually a bit of a joke. I mean, it's not, and I love that people take more from it. It's really, yeah, it's really nice. But sadly, it was just a bit of a throwaway nickname that stuck.
I'm curious about your beautiful tattoos. Would you
Ooh,
mind talking about them a little bit?
yeah, sure. I've got a bunch of them. Um, this is Hildegard von Bingen, a painting that she did of Jesus, with Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Um, I've got some. This is a little guy from a manuscript of folk song. Um, this is an Ace of Wands. They're all kind of woodcut style. This is a Guidonian hand, which is a way of that they used to, so monks used to improvise. So it's kind of like notation. Um, so it's they'd learn, what each note, each part of the hand was, as is on the diagram, and then the person leading them would kind of point. So they'd know what note they were supposed to be singing. So it's a kind of, yeah, way of conducting. So that they're all very nerdy. They're extremely, yeah, big nerdy tattoos.
Are you working on a new album?
Um, I've not had much kind of brain space to write lately, but my plan for the summer is to take myself away somewhere. I think I find that I write better when I'm out of a day-to-day life when there's not dishes to do or. Um, so I think residencies really suit me. Like I'll just knock out a bunch of songs. So my plan is to take myself off this summer. I don't know where or when yet, just maybe for a week, and try and get some things written. I have some seeds of ideas that I'd like to water and try and grow. But it's very hard, in day-to-day life, I think, for me right now to find with doing a PhD and other things, it's yeah, hard to put time aside for it. But I feel like writing, so hopefully I will.
Good. I remembered what I was going to ask you
Mhm.
because you had mentioned about polls on Instagram for band
Oh
names,
yeah.
and I was curious about your relationship with social media.
Mm, I hate it. Um, no, in some ways it's a tool, and all tools are useful for things. They're not always, they don't do everything and they can't do everything, and there's always drawbacks, right? So I think it can be used in a really great way. I've met a lot of collaborators. I've met a lot of great musicians, met promoters. I've got opportunities through Instagram, through social media, but it can be a really hard place to be, and you have to do so much thinking about it. And I used to use it a lot more as a kind of more of a creative diary type thing, and I quite like it. I like being able to look back through it as this kind of like, yeah, documentation, like diary of what I've been up to and the making process as well. Um, but it's always hard when you're trying to sell something, especially when it's something that's very personal, like music or art. Like it feels like, here's my soul, please like and comment. Oh, it feels very, yeah. So I'm conflicted. It's a useful tool in some ways, and some ways it's soul destroying. So you know.
Well, I think that we were talking earlier about the democratization of, DIY culture and also integrating technology, and it
Mm,
does relate to that too, right?
massively, and it's one of these things with like a lot of folk technologies, or like folk uses of technologies. You need to often the way you do it is by existing within these systems that are, you know, often corrupt or capitalist, or like, these systems that you don't necessarily agree with, but you've got to like kind of figure out a way of using them. There's ways of using them, kind of being a bit cheeky with them, kind of sneaking in the sort of the work you want to do. It would be amazing if we had an alternative kind of platform, but it's very hard to build one with the same reach. So it's a very, it's been incredible for a lot of people and for a lot of spread of folk culture and folk, yeah, ways of expressing yourself. Like memes are folk art, and that's the hill that I like die on. Is that a meme is a piece of folk art. You express something, someone else changes it, you know, modifies it, it lives across, yeah. So I think I find it really interesting. Um, yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned, you're just so curious and you're always learning. Are there other things you like to get into, like cooking or different kinds of making or?
I mean, my most recent, I've started. Um, I've started a medieval longsword class, a beginner's class. I'm 3 weeks in. Um, it's great fun. Yeah, so that's my most recent that'll be my hobby moment. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it. It's really good fun. So yeah, I do lots of different things, but that's my current surprise new hobby. Yeah, and I'm also really quite yeah invested in like non-league football, and that's kind of ended up becoming part of my work as well, as like community creativity stuff. But yeah, just always collecting things to do.
So the longsword is, so it's like a martial art, like you're learning to fight.
Yeah, it's German medieval. It's based on some German medieval like manuscripts. So it's specifically German style, which is different to Italian style. I've found out in the last 3 weeks. That seems like a contentious issue that I don't quite understand. Maybe someone can maybe I'll learn more about it. But yeah, so it's just a big two-handed sword. It's great fun. They give you plastic practice ones. They don't give you the big metal ones. I've not been given a big metal sword yet. It's just a plastic one.
Okay.
Yeah.
The closest I came to that, when I used to do Tai Chi, I did a sword form, and it was a metal sword. It was pretty flimsy, but it was like that feeling. It felt pretty cool.
It feels very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much.
No, thank you so much. It's been so nice to talk to you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Keep in mind, I've also linked directly several episodes you'll find interesting in the show notes of this one. Please do share this with your friends and check out episodes you may have missed at leahroseman.com. If you could buy me a coffee to support this series, that would be wonderful. I'm an independent podcaster, and I really do need the help of my listeners. All the links are in the show notes. The podcast theme music was written by Nick Cold. Have a wonderful week.